Hey everyone, tonight we're diving into something that will absolutely blow your mind. Forget everything you think you know about medieval beggars. These weren't just desperate people asking for coins. They were part of an underground network so sophisticated, so secret, that it operated right under the noses of kings, priests, and guards for centuries. Before we begin this journey into the shadows of medieval streets, take a moment to like this video if you're ready to discover something incredible. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always amazing to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, get comfortable, and prepare yourself for a story about survival, secrets, and a hidden world that existed in plain sight. Number 1. Life on the edge of survival. Picture this. You're standing in a medieval city street, and the smell hits you first. Human waste, rotting food, and unwashed bodies create a cloud so thick you can taste it. The cobblestones under your bare feet are slippery with things you don't want to think about. And you own nothing. Absolutely nothing. Welcome to life as a medieval beggar. You've just been kicked out of your village because the harvest failed. Or maybe your husband died and left you with nothing. Or perhaps you were born with a twisted leg and no family wanted to feed a mouth that couldn't work. Whatever brought you here, you're now part of the most dangerous social class in medieval Europe. But here's what's fascinating. These weren't just random desperate people stumbling around hoping for scraps. Medieval beggars created one of the most complex underground societies in history. They had to, because if they didn't work together, they died. It was that simple. In a world where stealing bread could get you hanged, where being homeless was practically illegal, and where most people saw beggars as cursed by God, survival required more than just asking for coins. It required intelligence, strategy, and most importantly, it required communication that nobody else could understand. Medieval cities were death traps for the poor. Guards would beat you for existing in the wrong place. Merchants would have you arrested for looking at their goods. Citizens would throw actual garbage at you from their windows. And if you got sick or injured, well, you better hope you had friends because nobody else was coming to help. That's where the network came in. Imagine walking into a completely foreign city, not knowing a soul, starving and desperate. But then you see a tiny symbol carved into a doorframe. A mark that tells you exactly which houses are safe, which ones have generous owners, and which ones hide violent dogs. You spot a fellow beggar across the street, and with just a simple hand gesture, he tells you where the guards patrol, when the market closes, and where you can sleep without getting robbed. This wasn't random. This was organized. This was survival elevated to an art form. The medieval beggar network stretched across entire continents. A symbol learned in London could save your life in Paris. A hand signal from Rome worked just as well in Prague. They created the first truly international communication system, and they did it completely in secret. But why was this necessary? Because medieval society was designed to crush people like them. There was no unemployment insurance, no homeless shelters, no food stamps. If you couldn't work, if you had no family, if you were disabled or widowed or orphaned, society's message was clear: disappear or die. So they chose a third option. They disappeared into plain sight, right there on every street corner, speaking a language nobody else could crack. Number 2. The birth of hidden code. The year is roughly 1200, and something incredible is happening in the shadows of medieval Europe. Beggars are talking to each other, but not in any language you'd recognize. They're using symbols, gestures, and words that sound normal, but carry secret meanings. They're creating the medieval world's first encrypted communication system. How did this start? Think about it. You're a beggar in, say, medieval Paris. You discover that the baker on Rue Saint-Martin always gives away yesterday's bread right before evening prayers. That's gold-level information. But how do you share this with other beggars without every lazy person in the city crowding the spot and ruining it? You create a code. The genius of medieval beggars was that they borrowed from everyone. They took hand signals from monks who had vows of silence. They stole symbols from merchants' guild marks. They adapted phrases from traveling performers. And they mixed it all together into something completely new. But here's what makes this incredible. They did it across language barriers. A French beggar and a German beggar might not share a single word in common, but they could communicate perfectly using this hidden system. The code became bigger than any single language or culture. The symbols were brilliant in their simplicity. A small notch carved in a door frame meant generous owner. Two parallel lines scratched into stone meant guards patrol here regularly. A tiny cross with a line through it warned religious fanatic lives here, avoid at all costs. These weren't random doodles. Each symbol was tested, refined, and passed down through generations. But the verbal code was even more sophisticated. They created words that sounded like normal conversation but carried hidden meanings. A beggar might approach you and say the sparrows are singing early today, which sound like innocent small talk. But to another beggar, it meant the guards are doing extra patrols, be careful. They developed entire conversations that could happen in public, right in front of authorities, without anyone suspecting. Two beggars could plan a coordinated approach to a wealthy merchant's house, share information about which streets to avoid, and warn each other about dangerous situations, all while appearing to discuss the weather. The hand signals were perhaps the most ingenious part. Medieval streets were crowded, noisy, and chaotic, but a subtle touch to the nose, a specific way of adjusting your cloak, or a particular way of holding your begging bowl could communicate complex information instantly across a crowded marketplace. What's remarkable is how quickly this spread. Medieval Europe had terrible communication systems for regular people. News traveled slowly, and information was heavily controlled by the powerful. But the beggar network, it moved information faster than royal messengers. A new symbol or signal could spread from London to Rome in months, passed from beggar to beggar along trade routes and pilgrimage paths. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about power. For the first time in medieval history, the lowest social class had something the upper classes didn't: perfect, secret communication. Number 3. Symbols carved on doors. Walk through any medieval city today. If you know what to look for, you might still find them. Tiny marks carved into stone door frames. Scratches on wooden shutters. Symbols etched so small and subtle that they look like random damage from centuries of wear. But they're not random. They're a library written in stone, and they once meant the difference between life and death. Medieval beggars turned every city into a guidebook. But instead of writing reviews on paper that could be found and read by authorities, they carved their intelligence directly into the architecture. These symbols were their Yelp reviews, their safety warnings, their survival manual, all rolled into one. Let's decode some of these ancient marks. A simple circle with a dot in the center carved near a door meant wealthy household, gives regularly to beggars. Two parallel vertical lines warned violent dog on property. A triangle with a line underneath it meant merchant's house, best approach during morning hours. An X with a circle around it was the medieval equivalent of a skull and crossbones, danger. Previous beggars had been injured or arrested here. But the system was much more sophisticated than just good house/bad house. They developed symbols for timing. A crescent moon shape meant approach only at night. A circle with rays coming out of it meant best during daylight hours. A symbol that looked like a tiny ladder meant servants are sympathetic, avoid the master. Some marks told stories. A series of small notches might indicate how many beggars had been successful at that location. Deeper cuts suggested higher value targets. Symbols placed at different heights carried different meanings. Marks at eye level were general information. Marks near the ground were warnings about ground-level dangers like dogs or traps. Marks higher up indicated information about upper-story windows where food might be dropped. The really clever beggars developed seasonal symbols. A tiny leaf shape meant generous during harvest time. A symbol resembling icicles warned household becomes hostile during winter months. Some marks indicated religious households that gave more during specific holy days. What's incredible is how they hid these symbols in plain sight. They carved them into existing decorations, mixed them with legitimate mason's marks, or disguised them as natural wear and tear. A wealthy merchant might walk past his own doorframe daily, never realizing it was marked with symbols telling beggars exactly when his servants took breaks and which window was closest to the kitchen. The symbols weren't just about individual houses either. They marked entire neighborhoods. Certain combinations of symbols indicated whether an area was beggar-friendly, patrolled heavily by guards, or controlled by violent criminal gangs. They marked the locations of public wells where you could drink safely, communal ovens where bakers might give away burned bread, and churches that actually followed Christ's teachings about helping the poor versus those that just preached about it. Some of the most important symbols were warnings about authorities. A symbol resembling a crown meant area frequently visited by nobility, stay alert. A cross with a sword through it warned corrupt church officials, they'll turn you in. A circle with lines radiating from it meant Informers live here. Don't trust local beggars. The maintenance of this system was remarkable. Older, experienced beggars would regularly walk circuits, checking symbols, updating them, or adding new information. If a generous household became hostile, the symbol would be modified or scratched out. If a dangerous area became safe, new marks would appear. But perhaps most impressively, they developed symbols that could only be understood in combination. A simple mark by itself might mean nothing, but combined with another symbol 20 feet away, it could provide detailed intelligence about patrol routes, safe sleeping spots, or scheduled food distributions. This wasn't graffiti. This was architecture as communication, turning the very buildings of medieval cities into a secret network that only they could read. Number 4. The hand signals nobody else knew. In the crowded, chaotic streets of medieval cities, words could be overheard, symbols could be spotted, but hand signals? Hand signals were invisible. Medieval beggars perfected a language of gestures so subtle, so natural-looking, that they could hold entire conversations in the middle of a marketplace without anyone suspecting a thing. Picture this scene. You're a medieval merchant, standing in a town square, haggling over the price of wool. Behind you, two beggars are having a complete strategic discussion about which houses to target, when the guards change shifts, and where the best scraps can be found. But all you see are two ragged people occasionally scratching their noses and adjusting their clothes. The hand signals started simple, but evolved into something incredibly sophisticated. A casual scratch behind the right ear meant guards approaching from the north. Touching your nose with your index finger while looking left meant safe house in that direction. But the really advanced signals could communicate complex information with tiny movements that looked completely natural. The beauty of their system was how they disguised everything as ordinary behavior. Beggars were expected to fidget, scratch, and move restlessly. Who would suspect that a beggar adjusting his torn cloak was actually signaling wealthy merchant heading toward the cathedral, good target for afternoon approach? They developed different signal categories. Basic survival signals were simple and universal. Everyone in the network knew them. A closed fist held at waist level meant immediate danger. An open palm shown briefly meant all clear. Touching your throat with your fingertips meant, I'm hungry, share information about food. But specialized signals required training. Experienced beggars taught newcomers how to signal different types of information. Religious signals indicated information about churches and monasteries. The subtle sign of the cross meant generous religious household. The same gesture made backwards warned religious fanatics who hate beggars. Trade signals shared information about merchants and markets. Rubbing thumb and forefinger together like counting coins meant wealthy target. The same gesture made with obvious exaggeration warned greedy merchant avoid. Pointing subtly while pretending to scratch could indicate specific stalls or shops worth approaching. Weather and timing signals were crucial for survival. Shading eyes with a hand while looking up meant storm coming, find shelter. A gesture like brushing dirt off clothes meant guards doing extra patrols today. Touching your wrist as if checking for injury meant wait until after the hour bell. The most sophisticated signals involved spatial communication. Beggars could direct each other to specific locations using gestures that looked like random movements. Scratching your left shoulder while glancing right meant meet at the third alley past the blacksmith. Adjusting your belt while looking down indicated check the ground near your feet for hidden messages. They even developed signals for complex social situations. A quick touch to the heart meant this person can be trusted. The same gesture held longer warned this person is an informer. Brushing your forehead as if wiping sweat meant, I have important information to share privately. What made this system nearly unbreakable was how they layered meanings. The same basic gesture could mean different things depending on context, location, and timing. A signal that meant food available in the morning might mean guards drunk in the evening. This prevented outsiders from learning their system, even if they figured out individual signals. They also developed emergency protocols. Certain combinations of rapid signals meant scatter immediately. Others meant converge on this location. During raids or crackdowns, these emergency signals could coordinate the movement of dozens of beggars across an entire city district within minutes. The training process was remarkable. New beggars weren't just thrown into the system. They were carefully taught by experienced members, starting with basic survival signals and gradually learning more complex communications. This ensured quality control and prevented infiltration by authorities. But perhaps most impressively, They adapted their signals to local conditions. In cities where guards were particularly observant, signals became more subtle. In areas where beggars were more tolerated, they could afford slightly more obvious gestures. The system was living, breathing, constantly evolving. This invisible language allowed medieval beggars to coordinate like a military unit while appearing to be nothing more than scattered, desperate individuals. Number 5. Secret words that fooled the guards. The verbal code of medieval beggars was perhaps their greatest achievement. They created an entire vocabulary that could be spoken openly in public, right in front of guards, merchants, and church officials, without anyone suspecting they were hearing military-level intelligence being shared. The genius lay in making everything sound completely innocent. 2 beggars could plan a coordinated approach to a wealthy household, share warnings about violent authorities, and coordinate meeting times, all while appearing to discuss the most mundane topics imaginable. Let's crack their code. When a beggar said, "The baker's bread rises early," he wasn't discussing pastries. He was telling other beggars that a particular merchant left his house early in the morning, making it a good time to approach his servants for scraps. The priest's bells ring sweetly meant that a specific church was generous with food distributions. But the bells ring too loudly warned that the same church had hostile clergy who would have beggars arrested. Weather talk was perfect cover for danger signals. Storm clouds gathering from the east meant guards were increasing patrols in the eastern district. The wind feels cold today warned that authorities were in a particularly harsh mood, arresting beggars for minor offenses. Sunshine breaking through the clouds meant the all-clear patrols were light and officials were distracted. Animal references carried military-level intelligence. The sparrows are feeding well meant food was available at specific locations. The crows are noisy today warned of informers in the area. The dogs are sleeping peacefully meant guard dogs at certain locations were sedated or absent. But the wolves are hunting was an emergency signal meaning violent authorities were actively seeking beggars to arrest or beat. They developed seasonal codes that changed regularly to prevent detection. Spring words meant one thing, winter words meant another. The flowers bloom early this year might indicate in spring that wealthy merchants were feeling generous. The same phrase in winter could mean that certain safe houses have been compromised. Religious language provided perfect camouflage because everyone in medieval society spoke in religious terms. God's blessing shines bright meant a particular religious household was generous to beggars. The devil walks among us warned of corrupt church officials who pretended to help but actually turned beggars over to authorities. Angels watch over the faithful indicated that a monastery provided reliable food and shelter. Trade terminology let them discuss specific targets openly. The wool is fine quality meant a cloth merchant was wealthy and approachable. The metal needs more hammering warned that a blacksmith was violent toward beggars. The grain store's well indicated that a miller had surplus food he might share. But the really sophisticated verbal codes involved layered meanings that change based on context. The phrase "my feet are tired" could mean I need rest when spoken to a friend, but guards are chasing me when used as a response to specific other phrases. This prevented outsiders from cracking their system, even if they overheard conversations. They created false conversations that served as passwords and identification. A new beggar approaching a group might say, "Have you seen the merchant's red horse today?" The correct response, something like "Yes, but it limps on the left side," would identify him as part of the network and provide him with whatever information the phrase requested. Emergency phrases could clear an area instantly. The storm comes quickly meant scatter immediately. The harvest is ending early meant converge on a specific backup location. These phrases were designed to sound natural enough that non-beggars wouldn't think twice about hearing them. They even developed codes for different types of authorities. The shepherd is watching his flock meant regular guards were on patrol. The wolf dressed as a shepherd warned of undercover officials or informers. The shepherd sleeps meant guards were drunk or distracted. Personal safety codes were crucial for vulnerable beggars. The flower wilts in harsh sun meant a female beggar was in danger from violent men. The bird's wing is broken indicated someone was injured and needed help. The nest is empty meant a particular safe location had been compromised. What made this system unbreakable was how they mixed real conversation with coded language. They discussed genuinely mundane topics, drop in coded phrases, return to normal conversation, and insert more intelligence, creating conversations that were simultaneously completely innocent and packed with crucial information. The authorities never figured it out. To them, beggars were just chattering about weather, animals, and daily concerns. But beneath that innocent chatter was flowing the most sophisticated intelligence network in medieval Europe. Number 6. Ranking among beggars. Medieval beggars weren't a chaotic mass of desperate people. They were organized, hierarchical, and their secret language wasn't just about survival. It was about power, control, and maintaining a complex social structure that rivaled the formal systems of medieval nobility. At the top were the kings, veteran beggars who controlled territories, managed networks, and made life-or-death decisions for dozens of others. These weren't just lucky survivors. They were brilliant organizers who understood human psychology, urban geography, and political systems better than most educated nobles. The kings identified themselves through subtle linguistic markers in their secret language. They used specific phrases that marked their authority. When a king said the castle holds firm, other beggars knew this wasn't just conversation, it was a command. Lower-ranking beggars would respond with phrases like, "The walls are strong," acknowledging their subordinate position. Below the kings were the lieutenants, experienced beggars who managed day-to-day operations in specific districts. They coordinated food distribution, managed conflicts, and served as the primary trainers for new recruits. Their code phrases often involved military-sounding language disguised as innocent talk. The soldiers' march at dawn might mean coordinate approach to the market district when it opens. The bulk of the network consisted of citizens, experienced beggars who knew the full language and could operate independently but still follow the hierarchy's rules. They had their own coded phrases for requesting permission, reporting information upward, and coordinating with peers. At the bottom were novices, new beggars who were still learning the system. They were given limited vocabulary and specific phrases to identify themselves as learners. A novice might say, "I seek the old wisdom." An experienced beggar would know to begin basic training. But here's where it gets fascinating. They also had specialists. Scouts who gathered intelligence about guard movements, wealthy targets, and safe locations. Healers who knew herbal medicine and treated injuries. Teachers who trained newcomers. Each group had specialized vocabulary within the larger code. The hierarchical language served multiple purposes. It prevented chaos by establishing clear command structures. It protected information by limiting who could access sensitive intelligence. And it maintained quality control by ensuring only trained, trustworthy members had full access to the network's resources. Kings used command phrases that couldn't be questioned. "The sun sets early today" from a king meant all beggars in his territory should cease operations and hide. The same phrase from a lower-ranking member was just weather talk. Context and speaker identity were everything. Territory markers were built into the language. Different areas of a city had different code phrases. A beggar working the cathedral district used different base vocabulary than one working the merchant quarter. This prevented conflicts and ensured efficient coverage of urban areas. Promotion within the hierarchy required mastering increasingly complex language elements. A novice became a citizen by demonstrating knowledge of basic survival codes. Citizens became lieutenants by learning specialized territorial and organizational phrases. The most gifted lieutenants might eventually learn the full king-level vocabulary. They developed elaborate rituals around rank recognition. When beggars from different territories met, they would exchange coded phrases that established their relative positions in the hierarchy. A lieutenant encountering a king from another city would use specific verbal formulas that acknowledged the king's authority while asserting his own legitimate rank. The system included checks and balances. Kings couldn't abuse their power too extensively because citizens could communicate among themselves and even coordinate resistance using the same secret language. The code included phrases for challenging corrupt leadership and organizing collective action. They also had special vocabulary for dealing with outsiders who tried to infiltrate their ranks. Suspected spies or informers could be identified through linguistic tests that only genuine network members would pass. False beggars sent by authorities would fail these verbal challenges and be exposed or led astray. Punishment and reward systems were encoded into their language. Phrases like "the bird finds good hunting" indicated a member would receive extra food or protection. "The nest grows cold" warned that someone was losing favor and might be expelled from the network. What's remarkable is how this hierarchy adapted to local conditions while maintaining overall coherence. A king in Paris used different specific phrases than a king in London, but both could communicate and establish relative authority through core hierarchical vocabulary that transcended regional differences. The ranking system wasn't just about power, it was about survival efficiency. By organizing themselves hierarchically and encoding that organization into their secret language, medieval beggars created the most effective poor relief and mutual aid system in medieval Europe. They achieved what governments and churches couldn't: reliable support for society's most vulnerable members. Number 7. Spying on the wealthy. Medieval beggars weren't just asking for scraps. They were running the most sophisticated intelligence operation in medieval Europe. While nobles focused on court intrigue and merchants worried about trade routes, beggars were gathering detailed intelligence on everyone who mattered, and their secret language allowed them to share this information with deadly efficiency. Think about it. Beggars were invisible to the wealthy. Rich merchants walked past them daily without a second glance. Noble ladies stepped over them like they were puddles. Church officials shooed them away without really seeing them. But the beggars? The beggars were watching, learning, recording everything in their secret code. Their intelligence gathering was remarkably systematic. They developed coded categories for different types of wealthy targets. Golden sparrows were newly wealthy merchants who might be generous to gain social standing. Iron ravens were established rich families who were notoriously stingy. Silver doves were wealthy widows who often gave to religious causes, including helping the poor. The information they gathered would have impressed modern intelligence agencies. They knew which merchants traveled with large amounts of cash and when. They tracked the movement patterns of wealthy families, noting when houses would be empty or when servants would be distracted. They observed and recorded the personal habits, weaknesses, and routines of anyone with money. Their coded language allowed them to share incredibly detailed intelligence through seemingly innocent conversation. The golden sparrow builds her nest in the third oak meant a wealthy merchant's wife could usually be found in the third house from the corner around mid-morning, when she was most likely to give alms. The iron raven guards his grain fiercely, warned other beggars that a particular wealthy household was hostile and possibly dangerous. They created detailed profiles of wealthy individuals using their secret vocabulary. A conversation like "the silver dove feeds at dawn but flies away when thunder comes" told other beggars that a wealthy widow was generous in the morning but became hostile if approached by too many beggars at once. This level of behavioral analysis rivals modern marketing research. The beggars developed specialized roles within their intelligence network. Watchers positioned themselves near wealthy households to observe patterns. Listeners worked as servants or hung around markets to overhear conversations. Followers tracked important individuals through their daily routines. Each role had specialized vocabulary within their secret language. They paid particular attention to the wealthy during religious seasons. The silver dove sings sweetest during holy weeks meant certain rich individuals were most generous during religious holidays. The golden sparrow molts after harvest indicated some merchants were stingier after they'd paid their expenses but more generous when business was good. Their intelligence network tracked more than just generosity. They monitored which wealthy individuals were traveling, when houses would be empty, when servants were likely to be dismissed or distracted. The golden sparrow's nest lies empty when the moon is dark might mean a particular wealthy family traveled regularly on certain dates. They even gathered intelligence on the wealthy's relationships and politics. Knowing which nobles were feuding, which merchants were facing financial problems, or which church officials were corrupt gave beggars enormous advantages in knowing how to approach different situations. The code included warnings about wealthy individuals who were dangerous to beggars. The iron raven has sharp talons, warned that a particular rich person was violent toward the poor. The false dove carries poison, indicated someone who pretended to be generous but actually harmed beggars who trusted them. They tracked the economics of generosity with scientific precision. Their coded language included detailed information about timing, approach methods, and optimal strategies for different types of wealthy individuals. The silver dove feeds her young at sunset might mean a particular wealthy woman gave food to beggars every evening, but only if approached respectfully near the kitchen entrance. What made their intelligence operations so effective was how they shared information across large areas. A beggar in one district could learn detailed intelligence about wealthy individuals across town through their network. Information flowed through their secret language faster than through any official communication system. They even developed counterintelligence capabilities. Their coded language included phrases for identifying and warning about wealthy individuals who were trying to infiltrate or spy on the beggar network. They could coordinate responses to threats and organize collective action when wealthy or powerful individuals became hostile to their operations. This intelligence network was so effective that beggars often knew more about what was happening in medieval cities than the official authorities did. While guards focused on obvious crimes and nobles worried about grand politics, beggars were tracking the real flow of money, power, and opportunity through their secret language. The wealthy never suspected that the ragged figures they ignored daily were actually sophisticated intelligence operatives who knew their schedules, their weaknesses, their travel plans, and their personal habits better than their own families did. Number 8. Avoiding punishments in jails. In medieval Europe, being poor wasn't just difficult, it was often illegal. Laws against vagabondage could get you whipped, branded, or locked in stocks for the crime of being homeless. But medieval beggars developed the most sophisticated early warning and evasion system in history, using their secret language to stay one step ahead of brutal punishments that could kill them. The punishment for begging varied by location, but was never pleasant. In some cities, first-time offenders got public whippings. Repeat offenders might have their ears cut off or be branded with hot irons. The worst punishments included having holes drilled through their ears, being sold into temporary slavery, or even execution. For beggars, avoiding the authorities wasn't just about comfort, it was about survival. Their secret language became an early warning system more effective than any medieval military network. Coded phrases like "the hounds are running early today" meant city guards were conducting sweeps to arrest beggars. The master calls his dogs home, signaling all clear when patrols had ended. These warnings could spread across an entire city in minutes, allowing hundreds of beggars to disappear before authorities arrived. They developed specific codes for different types of law enforcement. Gray wolves were regular city guards who might beat beggars, but weren't usually deadly. Black wolves were more dangerous officials who were known to severely injure or kill beggars. False shepherds were corrupt officials who demanded bribes or sexual favors to leave beggars alone. The timing codes were incredibly sophisticated. The wolves hunt when the bell tolls 3. Might mean guards always did sweeps at 3 p.m. The pack sleeps during the feast could indicate that during religious festivals, when guards were drinking or distracted, it was safer to operate openly. This timing intelligence was constantly updated and shared through their network. They created detailed maps of urban areas using coded language. The den lies beyond the third stone might refer to a safe hiding place 3 buildings past a specific landmark. Wolves avoid the thorny path could indicate routes that guards didn't patrol regularly. New beggars could learn entire city layouts through coded conversations with experienced network members. Their escape routes were planned with military precision. The secret language included detailed codes for coordinating mass evacuations. The pack scatters when lightning strikes meant everyone should immediately head to predetermined backup locations. The fox leads the rabbits home indicated specific experienced beggars would guide groups to safety through known escape routes. They developed codes for different threat levels. Storm clouds gathering meant increased guard activity, but not immediate danger. Thunder overhead meant arrests were happening nearby, and beggars should avoid the area. Lightning strikes meant immediate evacuation. Guards were conducting a major sweep, and anyone caught would face serious punishment. The network included detailed intelligence about individual law enforcement officers. Some guards could be bribed, others were violently anti-beggar, and some were simply doing their jobs without personal malice. Their coded language tracked these personalities. The old wolf has gray teeth might mean a particular guard was corrupt but not violent, while the young wolf bites deep warn of a guard who enjoyed hurting beggars. They even developed codes for legal situations. Medieval justice was often arbitrary, but beggars learned to game the system when possible. The shepherd counts his flock at dawn might mean a particular judge was more lenient in morning hearings. The false shepherd demands silver indicated which officials could be bribed to reduce punishments. Their intelligence network extended into jails and punishment areas. Beggars who had been arrested and released brought back detailed information about prison conditions, guard schedules, and escape possibilities. This intelligence was immediately encoded and shared through their secret language to help others avoid the same fate. They tracked seasonal enforcement patterns with scientific precision. Wolves grow hungry before winter might mean authorities increased arrests before cold weather to clear beggars from the streets. The pack rest during harvest could indicate that during busy agricultural periods, fewer guards were available for anti-beggar operations. The code included specific protocols for helping arrested network members. The wounded bird needs a nest might mean a beggar had been injured by guards and needed medical help. The caged sparrow awaits the dawn could indicate someone was imprisoned and needed bail money or legal intervention from sympathetic network contacts. What made their system nearly unbreakable was how they layered security measures. Multiple backup meeting points, alternate communication methods, and redundant warning systems meant that even if authorities discovered part of their network, the rest could continue operating and warn others about the compromise. The medieval authorities never understood what they were up against. They saw scattered, desperate individuals when they were actually facing a coordinated network with better intelligence, communication, and tactical planning than most military units of the time. Number 9. How the Church reacted. The medieval Catholic Church held absolute power over European society. They controlled education, morality, and social order. So when they discovered that the lowest members of society had developed their own secret communication system, their reaction was swift, brutal, and ultimately futile. Church officials initially dismissed beggar codes as mere superstition. But as the network grew more sophisticated and began operating right under their noses, using churches themselves as meeting points and communication hubs, the church's attitude changed dramatically. They declared the secret language lingua diaboli, the devil's tongue. The theological reasoning was typically medieval. God, they argued, had ordained a natural social order where the poor accepted their station with humility and gratitude. A secret language that allowed beggars to organize, coordinate, and resist authority was clearly the work of Satan. Any beggar caught using coded language could be charged with heresy, witchcraft, or devil worship, charges that carried penalties up to burning at the stake. But the church faced a fundamental problem. Christian doctrine demanded charity toward the poor, while their political interests required maintaining social control. They wanted beggars to remain grateful, passive recipients of charity, not organized networks of individuals who could evaluate, compare, and even critique different religious institutions. The beggars' intelligence on the church itself was particularly embarrassing. Their coded language included detailed assessments of which priests were genuinely charitable versus which ones were corrupt, greedy, or hypocritical. Angels sing sweetly might mean a monastery genuinely helped the poor. False angels speak with serpent tongues, warn of religious officials who preach charity but treated beggars cruelly. Church attempts to crack the code were largely unsuccessful. They tried infiltrating beggar networks with fake poor people, but experienced beggars could usually identify these infiltrators through linguistic tests that required genuine knowledge of street survival. They offered rewards for information about the secret language, but the network's mutual protection systems made betrayal extremely dangerous for any beggar who tried it. The most sophisticated church response was attempting to create alternative communication systems that they could control. They established official beggar guilds with approved symbols and phrases, hoping to replace the underground network with a system they could monitor and regulate. These efforts largely failed because the official systems didn't provide the real survival information that made the secret language valuable. Some progressive church officials actually tried to study and understand the beggar codes. A few monasteries developed working relationships with local beggar networks, providing reliable charity in exchange for information and cooperation. These arrangements were often successful locally, but were condemned by higher church authorities as dangerous compromises with devil worshippers. The church's propaganda campaign against beggar codes was intensive. They preached sermons declaring that secret languages were inherently evil, that true Christians should speak plainly and honestly, and that hidden communication was the tool of Satan. They sponsored public demonstrations where reformed beggars supposedly renounced their coded language and begged forgiveness for their sins. But the practical effectiveness of these campaigns was limited. The secret language provided too much survival value for beggars to abandon it based on religious threats alone. Many beggars developed theological counter-arguments, pointing out that Jesus himself had spoken in parables, coded language that required interpretation to understand. They argued that their secret communication helped them practice Christian charity more effectively by sharing resources and protecting the vulnerable. The church also struggled with internal contradictions. Many individual priests and monks were genuinely sympathetic to beggars and quietly tolerated or even learned aspects of the coded language to better serve the poor. These religious officials found themselves caught between official church policy and practical Christian charity. Some of the most interesting church responses involved attempts at theological compromise. Certain church scholars argued that the beggar codes weren't inherently evil if they were used for survival rather than rebellion. They proposed sanctified versions of beggar communication that could be blessed by church authority and used for legitimate charitable purposes. The Church's ultimate failure to eliminate beggar codes revealed something important about medieval society. Despite all the power, authority, and threats of eternal damnation, the Church couldn't override the basic human need for survival and mutual aid. The secret language was too practical, too useful, and too deeply embedded in beggar culture to be destroyed by religious decree. Ironically, some of the Church's own practices borrowed from beggar communication methods. Monastic orders that took vows of silence developed their own coded gestures and symbols. Traveling priests and missionaries used subtle signals to identify safe houses and friendly contacts. The Church condemned devil's tongue and beggars while quietly employing similar techniques in their own operations. The conflict between Church authority and beggar codes continued throughout the medieval period, with neither side achieving complete victory. The Church's reaction ultimately revealed more about their own fears of losing social control than about any genuine theological concerns with secret languages. Number 10. The disappearance of the code. By the late medieval period, the secret language of beggars had become one of the most sophisticated communication systems in Europe. It had survived Church persecution, royal crackdowns, and centuries of social change. So what happened to this remarkable network? Why did a system that had protected and organized Europe's most vulnerable population for hundreds of years eventually fade into historical obscurity? The answer lies in the massive social changes that transformed Europe between the 14th and 16th centuries. The world that had created and sustained the beggar codes was disappearing, replaced by new systems of power, economics, and social organization that made the old underground network both less necessary and less possible. The first major blow came with the rise of centralized royal power. Medieval kings began establishing royal courts, professional armies, and bureaucratic governments that could enforce law and order more effectively than the scattered, feudal authorities of earlier centuries. These new governments developed systematic approaches to the beggar problem, including workhouses, official poor laws, and organized charity systems. The printing press, invented around 1440, fundamentally changed how information spread through society. The beggar network had thrived partly because official communication systems were so poor that their underground network was actually more effective. But printed books, pamphlets, and official notices made information more widely available, reducing the value of the beggar's intelligence advantage. Urban growth and economic changes also undermined the traditional beggar network. As medieval cities grew larger and more complex, the intimate knowledge of local conditions that had made the secret codes so valuable became harder to maintain. New economic opportunities, particularly in growing industries and expanding trade, provided alternatives to begging for some of society's most desperate members. The Protestant Reformation dealt another serious blow to the beggar codes. Protestant countries developed new approaches to charity and poor relief that were often more systematic and extensive than medieval Catholic charity had been. These new systems reduced the desperate conditions that had made underground organization necessary for survival. Perhaps most importantly, the rise of nation-states brought new forms of social control that specifically targeted the kind of networks beggars had created. Government officials began to understand that secret communication systems represented potential security threats, and they developed more sophisticated methods for detecting and disrupting underground networks. The beggar codes also faced internal pressures. As some members of the network gained access to legitimate economic opportunities, they often abandoned the underground system entirely. The most capable leaders of beggar communities sometimes became legitimate merchants, craftsmen, or even low-level government officials, draining talent from the network. Legal changes reduced both the need for and the effectiveness of secret communication. New poor laws, while often harsh, were more predictable than the arbitrary medieval justice that had made early warning systems so crucial. When beggars knew exactly what punishments they faced for specific offenses, the intelligence value of coded warnings decreased. The rise of professional police forces in larger cities made the old evasion tactics less effective. Professional law enforcement officers were more systematic, better organized, and harder to evade than the part-time guards and amateur enforcers of medieval times. The tactical advantages that secret codes had provided became less useful against more sophisticated opponents. Religious changes also played a role. As both Catholic and Protestant churches developed more organized approaches to charity, the need for beggars to maintain their own independent intelligence networks decreased. Official charity systems, while never as comprehensive as modern social services, were more reliable than the random generosity that medieval beggars had needed to track and coordinate around. Education and literacy gradually spread beyond the elite classes, making secret oral codes less necessary for information sharing. As more people learned to read and write, written communication became more practical even for lower social classes, reducing the unique advantages of spoken codes. By the 17th century, remnants of the old beggar codes existed only in isolated pockets. Some elements survived in criminal undergrounds, others were preserved in folk traditions, and a few fragments were recorded by scholars interested in unusual languages. But the great network that had once coordinated thousands of beggars across entire continents was essentially dead. The final irony is that the beggar codes disappeared not because they failed, but because they succeeded too well. By proving that society's most marginalized members could organize, communicate, and resist oppression, the network forced governments and institutions to develop more comprehensive responses to poverty and social control. Modern scholars studying the fragmentary records of medieval beggar codes are struck by their sophistication. The symbols, signals, and verbal codes that have been preserved suggest a communication system that was more complex than many official languages of the time. These weren't desperate people babbling in confusion. They were sophisticated linguists who created one of history's most successful underground networks. Today, echoes of the medieval beggar codes can be found in various subcultures that have developed their own secret languages for survival and resistance. From prison slang to protest movements, the basic human need to communicate secretly under oppressive conditions continues to generate new codes and languages. But the specific world that created the medieval beggar codes, with its particular combination of extreme inequality, weak official communication systems, arbitrary justice, and decentralized authority, is gone forever. The remarkable network that allowed Europe's most vulnerable people to survive and thrive through some of history's darkest periods remains one of the most impressive examples of grassroots organization and linguistic innovation ever recorded. The secret language of medieval beggars stands as proof that no matter how powerless a group may seem, human ingenuity and cooperation can create systems of mutual aid and resistance that even the most powerful authorities cannot entirely suppress. Their codes may have disappeared, but their legacy lives on in every underground network, every secret language, and every group of marginalized people who choose to organize rather than suffer alone. So the next time you see symbols scratched on walls, hear people using unfamiliar slang, or notice subtle gestures being exchanged in crowds, remember the medieval beggars. Remember that beneath the surface of every society, there are always networks of communication, cooperation, and mutual aid that the powerful never fully understand or control. The beggars spoke in riddles, but their message was clear. Even the lowest can rise, even the weakest can organize, and even in the darkest times, people will find ways to help each other survive. Their secret language is gone, but their spirit endures wherever human beings choose solidarity over submission, cooperation over competition, and hope over despair. But let's pause here at the end of this incredible journey through the shadows of medieval Europe and really understand what we've discovered. We haven't just learned about some quaint historical curiosity. We've uncovered something profound about human nature itself, something that connects directly to our world today in ways that might surprise you. The medieval beggar codes weren't just about survival. They were about dignity. Think about it, these were people that society had written off as worthless, as cursed by God, as deserving of their fate. But instead of accepting that judgment, they created something beautiful. They built networks of mutual support that were more reliable than government, more consistent than charity, and more sophisticated than anything the official world had to offer. When we look at those tiny symbols carved into door frames centuries ago, we're not just seeing survival tactics. We're seeing acts of rebellion against a world that said these people didn't matter. Every symbol was a declaration. We exist. We matter. We take care of each other. In a society that tried to make them invisible, they created a language that made them powerful. And here's what's remarkable. They succeeded completely outside the systems of power. They didn't wait for permission from kings or approval from priests. They didn't petition for rights or beg for recognition. They simply created what they needed, using nothing but human intelligence, cooperation, and determination. They proved that the most marginalized people in society could build networks more effective than anything the powerful had created. The sophistication of their system still amazes historians today. These weren't desperate people making random scratches on walls. They were linguistic innovators who created a communication system that worked across language barriers, cultural differences, and national borders. A beggar who learned the codes in England could use them effectively in France, Germany, or Italy. They created the first truly international language of the dispossessed. But perhaps most impressively, They maintained this system for centuries while keeping it almost completely secret from the authorities. Think about the discipline that required. Thousands of people across dozens of countries, over hundreds of years, all keeping the same secret, all protecting each other's security, all contributing to something larger than themselves. The training processes they developed were remarkable educational achievements. New beggars didn't just stumble into this network. They were carefully taught, evaluated, and gradually given access to more sensitive information as they proved their trustworthiness. They created schools without buildings, universities without professors, PhD programs in survival that were more rigorous than anything offered in medieval universities. Their intelligence networks gathered and distributed information more effectively than royal spy services. While kings struggled to get reliable information about conditions in their own kingdoms, beggar networks maintained detailed, up-to-date intelligence about economic conditions, political situations, and social changes across entire continents. They knew which harvests were failing before the farmers did. They tracked political instability before it erupted into war. They monitored economic trends that wouldn't be formally recognized for decades. The organizational structures they created were more democratic than most governments of their time. While medieval society was rigidly hierarchical, with power flowing only downward from kings to nobles to peasants, beggar networks included systems for challenging authority, replacing corrupt leaders, and ensuring that even the lowest-ranking members had voices in important decisions. Their conflict resolution systems were more sophisticated than medieval courts. When disputes arose within beggar communities, they had established procedures for mediation, arbitration, and appeal that ensured fair treatment for all parties. They created justice systems that actually worked for the people they served, unlike the arbitrary and corrupt official courts that most people had to endure. The economic systems they developed were more effective than official charity networks. While churches and nobles gave sporadically and conditionally, often requiring recipients to demonstrate proper gratitude and moral behavior, beggar networks provided systematic mutual aid based purely on need. They created the first comprehensive social safety net in European history, and they did it entirely through voluntary cooperation. Their medical knowledge networks preserved and transmitted healing practices that official medicine had lost or ignored. Beggar healers often knew more about treating wounds, infections, and diseases than trained physicians, because they had to deal with real problems using available resources rather than abstract theories using expensive ingredients. The psychological support systems they created were centuries ahead of their time. They understood that survival wasn't just about food and shelter. It was about maintaining hope, dignity, and human connection in the face of constant dehumanization. Their networks provided emotional support, social belonging, and shared purpose that kept people functioning under conditions that would have driven isolated individuals to despair or madness. Their innovation in symbolic communication influenced art, literature, and even architecture of their time. The symbols and codes they developed leaked into broader culture, influencing everything from religious iconography to decorative arts. Some of the mysterious symbols found in medieval buildings may actually be adaptations of beggar codes that were adopted by other groups. The strategic thinking they developed was military grade. Their ability to coordinate large-scale operations, gather and analyze intelligence, adapt to changing conditions, and maintain operational security would have impressed professional armies. They were fighting a war for survival, using tactics that were often more sophisticated than those used in actual wars. But beyond all the tactical brilliance, beyond all the organizational innovation, beyond all the linguistic creativity, there's something else. Something harder to quantify, but perhaps more important. The beggar codes represent one of history's most powerful examples of people refusing to accept the world's judgment of their worth. Medieval society told these people they were worthless, cursed, deserving of suffering. Official religion told them their poverty was God's punishment for sin. Government told them they had no rights, no voice, no legitimate claim to resources or respect. And these people looked at all of that and said, "No, we reject your definition of us. We will create our own worth, our own systems, our own power." That's a revolutionary act. That's the kind of thinking that changes history. And they did it not through violence or confrontation, but through cooperation, intelligence, and mutual aid. They created parallel power structures that were more effective than official ones. They built alternative societies that actually worked for their members. The parallels to modern struggles are impossible to ignore. Every time marginalized communities create their own support networks, their own communication systems, their own alternative economies, they're following the same path that medieval beggars pioneered. When modern activists develop coded language to evade surveillance, they're using techniques that beggars perfected 7 centuries ago. When grassroots organizations emerge to provide services that governments won't provide, they're implementing models that beggar networks proved could work. The digital age has created new possibilities for the kind of networks that medieval beggars built with nothing but human connection and shared symbols. Online communities, encrypted communications, peer-to-peer support networks, cryptocurrency systems that bypass traditional banking. All of these echo the innovations that medieval beggars developed using much more primitive tools. But there's also a warning in their story. The beggar codes disappeared not because they were defeated by superior force, but because the conditions that made them necessary changed. As governments became more systematic in addressing poverty, as economic opportunities expanded, as communication systems improved, the unique advantages of the underground network became less valuable. This suggests that the most effective way to eliminate underground networks isn't through suppression, it's through addressing the conditions that make them necessary. Medieval authorities spent centuries trying to crush beggar codes through violence and persecution and failed completely. But economic and social changes that reduced extreme poverty and improved official communication systems eventually made the codes obsolete. The implications for modern policy are significant. Instead of trying to suppress underground networks through surveillance and punishment, approaches that medieval authorities proved don't work. Maybe the focus should be on understanding what needs those networks meet and finding better ways to meet those needs through official systems. But perhaps the most important lesson from the medieval beggar codes is about human potential itself. These networks were created by people that society had written off as hopeless, worthless, incapable of contributing anything of value. And yet they created systems that were more sophisticated, more effective, and more humane than anything the officially powerful had built. This challenges fundamental assumptions about ability, intelligence, and worth. If medieval beggars, people with no formal education, no resources, no official authority, could create such remarkable innovations, what does that say about human potential in general? What does it say about all the people in all the societies throughout history who have been dismissed as worthless? How many brilliant innovations have been lost because the people who created them were never taken seriously by official society? How many solutions to persistent problems have been developed by marginalized communities but never recognized or adopted by mainstream institutions? How many times have the people society considers least valuable actually been the ones creating the most value? The story of medieval beggar codes suggests that human intelligence, creativity, and cooperative ability are much more widely distributed than official institutions usually recognize. The capacity to create sophisticated solutions to complex problems isn't limited to people with formal education, official authority, or social recognition. It emerges wherever human beings face challenges and work together to overcome them. This has profound implications for how we think about social problems today. Instead of assuming that solutions must come from experts, authorities, or institutions, maybe we should be looking more carefully at what marginalized communities are already creating to meet their own needs. Instead of dismissing underground networks as primitive or dangerous, maybe we should be studying them to understand what they're doing right. The medieval beggars created something that lasted for centuries and covered an entire continent. They built systems that provided security, support, and dignity for millions of people across hundreds of years. They proved that even the most marginalized people could create networks more effective than anything official society offered. And they did it all in secret, using nothing but human intelligence, cooperation, and determination. That's not just a historical curiosity. That's a demonstration of human potential that should inspire everyone who cares about social justice, community building, or human dignity. It's proof that no matter how powerless people seem, no matter how hopeless their situation appears, human beings have the capacity to create remarkable things when they work together. The secret language of medieval beggars is gone, but the spirit that created it lives on. It lives on in every community that takes care of its own members. It lives on in every network that shares resources and information to help people survive and thrive. It lives on in every group of people who refuse to accept society's judgment of their worth and instead create their own value, their own power, their own hope. So when you walk through modern cities and see people that society has written off, remember the medieval beggars. Remember that you might be looking at innovators, organizers, and network builders whose contributions you simply don't understand yet. Remember that some of history's most remarkable achievements have come from people that the powerful never bothered to notice. The beggars spoke in riddles, but their message was clear. Even the lowest can rise, even the weakest can organize, and even in the darkest times, people will find ways to help each other survive. Their secret language is gone, but their spirit endures wherever human beings choose solidarity over submission, cooperation over competition, and hope over despair. And that, perhaps, is the most important code of all. Not a system of symbols or signals, but a way of thinking that says, we matter. We belong to each other. We will take care of each other. And we will never stop finding ways to create dignity, connection, and hope no matter what the world throws at us. The medieval beggars carved their symbols into stone door frames that have lasted for centuries. But the most important thing they carved was into history itself, proof that human beings are capable of creating remarkable things, even under the most impossible circumstances, when they refuse to give up on each other. Their legacy isn't just in the fragments of symbols that historians still find scattered across Europe. Their legacy is in every act of mutual aid, every underground network, every secret language, and every community that decides to take care of its own members instead of waiting for someone else to do it. The secret language of medieval beggars reminds us that the most important communication doesn't always happen in official channels, through approved methods, or with recognized authority. Sometimes the most vital information, the most crucial innovations, and the most powerful networks emerge from the margins, created by people who have every reason to give up but choose instead to take care of each other. And in a world that still struggles with poverty, inequality, and social exclusion, that's a message worth remembering. The techniques may change, the technologies may evolve, but the fundamental human capacity to create connection, share resources, and build hope in the face of hopelessness, that remains constant. The medieval beggars proved it centuries ago, and people prove it again every day. The secret language changes, but the secret itself remains the same. We belong to each other, and together we can create possibilities that seem impossible when we're alone. That code will never disappear, because it's written not in symbols on walls, but in the human heart itself. The story of medieval beggar codes suggests that human intelligence, creativity, and cooperative ability are much more widely distributed than official institutions usually recognize. The capacity to create sophisticated solutions to complex problems isn't limited to people with formal education, official authority, or social recognition. It emerges wherever human beings face challenges and work together to overcome them. This has profound implications for how we think about social problems today. Instead of assuming that solutions must come from experts, authorities, or institutions, maybe we should be looking more carefully at what marginalized communities are already creating to meet their own needs. Instead of dismissing underground networks as primitive or dangerous, maybe we should be studying them to understand what they're doing right. The medieval beggars created something that lasted for centuries and covered an entire continent. They built systems that provided security, support, and dignity for millions of people across hundreds of years. They proved that even the most marginalized people could create networks more effective than anything official society offered. And they did it all in secret, using nothing but human intelligence, cooperation, and determination. That's not just a historical curiosity. That's a demonstration of human potential that should inspire everyone who cares about social justice, community building, or human dignity. It's proof that no matter how powerless people seem, no matter how hopeless their situation appears, human beings have the capacity to create remarkable things when they work together. The secret language of medieval beggars is gone, but the spirit that created it lives on. It lives on in every community that takes care of its own members. It lives on in every network that shares resources and information to help people survive and thrive. It lives on in every group of people who refuse to accept society's judgment of their worth and instead create their own value, their own power, their own hope. So when you walk through modern cities and see people that society has written off, remember the medieval beggars. Remember that you might be looking at innovators, organizers, and network builders whose contributions you simply don't understand yet. Remember that some of history's most remarkable achievements have come from people that the powerful never bothered to notice. The beggars spoke in riddles, but their message was clear. Even the lowest can rise, even the weakest can organize, and even in the darkest times, people will find ways to help each other survive. Their secret language is gone, but their spirit endures wherever human beings choose solidarity over submission, cooperation over competition, and hope over despair. And that, perhaps, is the most important code of all. Not a system of symbols or signals, but a way of thinking that says, we matter. We belong to each other. We will take care of each other. And we will never stop finding ways to create dignity, connection, and hope no matter what the world throws at us. The The medieval beggars carved their symbols into stone door frames that have lasted for centuries. But the most important thing they carved was into history itself, proof that human beings are capable of creating remarkable things, even under the most impossible circumstances, when they refuse to give up on each other. Their legacy isn't just in the fragments of symbols that historians still find scattered across Europe. Their legacy is in every act of mutual aid, every underground network, every secret language, and every community that decides to take care of its own members instead of waiting for someone else to do it. The secret language of medieval beggars reminds us that the most important communication doesn't always happen in official channels, through approved methods, or with recognized authority. Sometimes the most vital information, the most crucial innovations, and the most powerful networks emerge from the margins, created by people who have every reason to give up but choose instead to take care of each other. And in a world that still struggles with poverty, inequality, and social exclusion, that's a message worth remembering. The techniques may change, the technologies may evolve, but the fundamental human capacity to create connection, share resources, and build hope in the face of hopelessness, that remains constant. The medieval beggars proved it centuries ago, and people prove it again every day. The secret language changes, but the secret itself remains the same. We belong to each other, and together we can create possibilities that seem impossible when we're alone. That code will never disappear, because it's written not in symbols on walls, but in the human heart itself.